welcome again to tonight's webinar. My name is Marissa Lozano, and I'm the Director of Community Education here at MDA. We're thrilled to have you join us for our discussion on disclosing your disability at work. This learning event is part of our larger MDA community education programs, which focus on bringing the neuromuscular disease community together around education and resources. We encourage you to visit the community education page on mda.org for updates on upcoming events and programs. We are recording today's event and we'll be posting it to the website for on-demand viewing at a later date. Please know that all phone lines have been muted, but you can still ask questions. We'll have a Q&A session really kind of during the whole webinar today. So simply use the chat feature to type in your questions. There's a little icon down at the bottom right hand of your screen that looks kind of like a chat bubble. You can click on that and feel free to type in your questions as they come to you, and we'll do our best to address all of them. We may not get to every question, but we'll do our best. I'd also like to thank our webinar supporter, Edgewise Therapeutics. We would not be able to provide community education webinars like this if not for their support. And so we are very thankful for that. For over 70 years, MDA has led the way in accelerating research, advancing care, and advocating for the support of our families. Our mission is to empower the people that we serve, those that are living with muscular dystrophy, ALS, and related neuromuscular diseases, to live longer, more independent lives. Our mission comes to life through the 4 pillars. First, care. Through our national network of MDA care centers across the U.S., we support individuals and families from day one of their journey. Champion. Through our advocacy education efforts, we empower families with information and resources. Catalyst. Through our investments in research, we're furthering advancements in treatment discoveries. And lastly, through community programs like summer camp, our mentorship program, community education, we're helping individuals and families build supportive connections and relationships. So if you haven't done so already, we invite you to join the MDA community by registering with us. So just to kind of set the stage for our conversation today, our objectives are really to provide information to our audience on workers' rights within the workplace, to share some insights into when and how to disclose your disability to a current or prospective employer, and to discuss your rights and an employer's responsibility as it relates to accommodations. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's guests, Brian Chao and Michael Lewis. Brian is the Chief Financial Officer for the Starkloff Disability Institute. He attended Washington University in St. Louis, where he obtained his Bachelor of Science in Business Administration and his Master in Accounting degrees. Outside of work, Brian is involved with a variety of nonprofit organizations. Michael is currently the Director of Disability Policy for the Muscular Dystrophy Association, lobbying Congress and federal agencies on issues related to discrimination, employment, higher education, and recreation for individuals with neuromuscular disease. So we are thrilled to have you both here today. To start, it would be great if you could both take a few moments and introduce yourselves. So Brian, would you like to start?
Sure, thank you, Marissa. As Marissa said, my name is Brian Chao. I'm the CFO of Starkloff Disability Institute here in St. Louis, Missouri. Our mission is to build inclusion where we live, learn, work, and play through disability-led programs that advance economic opportunity and transform lives. And we primarily focus on helping people with disabilities, whether you're adults, college students transitioning into adulthood, or high school and now middle school students, focus on that next step in their life of landing a career of their choice where they can succeed. So I'm actually a participant in our programs. After I finished graduate school, I went through our career academy, which really helped me to learn how to talk about my disability with employers, learn about how I wanted to talk about it, and ask for those accommodations that could help me succeed in the workplace. Started my career, as Marissa said, I'm an accountant by training. Did internal audit and financial services for several years. Ended up joining the board at Starkloff Disability Institute, and a little bit later joining them in a employment capacity as their CFO, and have been here for about 6 years now. So, and the MDA has been a very important part of my life. since I was a young kid, and so very excited to be here today.
Great. Thank you, Brian. And Michael?
Hello, my name is Michael Lewis. As Marissa said, I am the Director of Disability Policy here at MDA. I lead our federal advocacy efforts on everything from accessible air travel to employment, education, civil rights. I myself have a disability. I am CP, so I, like Brian, I've had to learn how to navigate the career world and how to disclose my disability in the professional world. So very happy to be here this evening.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both. I think between the two of you, there's a lot of experience, a lot of personal insights and professional insights you can share. So we're excited to have this conversation. To get us kind of just started on, lay of the land, the basics. What is the Americans with Disabilities Act?
So the Americans with Disabilities Act was enacted in 1990, and what it does is prohibit the discrimination on the basis of disability in public accommodations and hiring. And what I mean by public accommodation is any, any place that is open to the public, whether that's a retailer, whether it's a restaurant. The ADA is really a milestone achievement. It is what universalized, for instance, curb cut and sidewalk, wheelchair ramp. Believe it or not, a little over 30 years ago, 1990, those weren't commonplace. And so the ADA really was a significant legislative accomplishment in ensuring the civil rights of Americans with disabilities.
Thank you.
Brian, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Michael, I think you summed it up very, very well. So
with that, tell me, who's protected by the ADA at work? And maybe this one's for you, Brian. How does the ADA work? Oh, go ahead.
So the ADA is an interesting piece of legislation because it doesn't have a very specific definition of what a person with a disability is. Kind of rounds it out in three categories or three bullet points, saying that a person with a disability is someone who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. It's somebody who may have a history or a record of such impairment, such as having cancer that's in remission, or a disability or an injury and disability that they've recovered from, or they may be just simply somebody who is perceived as having such an impairment, such as somebody who is using a wheelchair, or maybe just simply has scars from a severe burn. So if a person falls into any of these three categories, the entirety of the Americans with Disability Act covers them, and it is kind of pointedly made broad to cover a larger number of people.
So kind of a situational question for you here, and this could be for Brian or Michael, but if an employer notices that a job applicant or employee has a disability, if they kind of make that assumption, what is the employer allowed to say regarding the disability, if anything?
Michael, you want to take that one?
I'll take the first crack at this one. The short answer is nothing. The employer is not allowed to say, "Hey, I noticed you're in a wheelchair. What is your disability?" Or they can say, you know, "I noticed you have a speech impediment. Can you tell me about that?" It is really up to the individual with the disability to self-disclose. It's up to the individual when and how they do that. You know, in my own personal experience, when I go into an interview, or even before, I will say, you know, I wear bilateral hearing aids and I have a speech impediment. I also have mild CP, so if you need me to repeat anything tomorrow or whenever the interview is, you know, please don't hesitate to ask. One of the downfalls of the ADA as it is written is that even if you do disclose, the employer is not allowed to ask what type of accommodations you may need until after they extend the offer. And so a lot of times, because the employer is not able to ask the question, you know, sometimes they will make assumptions that could be completely erroneous, and say, "Oh, this is, you know, this employee candidate is gonna need this, and this, and that is going to cost me X amount of money, so, you know, even though I really like this individual and want to hire them, I don't know what that's gonna entail, so instead I'm just gonna write them off the list because, you know, I can't get that information up front." You know, recognizing that there is a purpose for that, but just in my personal experience, I think that particular sticky wicket, for lack of a better phrase, needs to be reworked, so that we eliminate that happening. You know, an employer making incorrect assumptions and choosing not to hire someone because they're not allowed to get answers to whatever questions they may have.
That's a good point I hadn't thought about. And that actually kind of leads well into our next question, which is, should you disclose your disability when applying for the job, after accepting the job, during the interview? Like when is the right time?
Sure. So I'll
Brian.
take this one, and I'll integrate a little bit what we encourage and practice here at Starkloff Disability Institute when working with folks on searching for careers and finding a career, and my personal experience. The decision whether or not to disclose and when and how to do that is completely up to you. I found in my experience with jobs that it has been best to kind of disclose early and talk about your disability in a way that shows you are confident in your abilities and comfortable with all that you can do and the responsibilities of the job, and just kind of working in whether it's the interview. I'll give a personal example of I had a lot of experience where I wouldn't disclose my disability when I succeeded with a phone interview, and then I was invited in for an in-person interview, and when the interviewer came out to the lobby or waiting room to get me, all of a sudden there was a very discomforting thing I could tell from their energy and aura, because they weren't expecting somebody in a wheelchair. I have a very visible disability with my muscular dystrophy. And that's just because people without disabilities just aren't very familiar with people with disabilities. And so they're thinking, do I need to hold the door for this person? Do I need to move the chair? What can I do to, help make this comfortable for them? And then also other things. Can this person do the job? Do I say the right thing? Was that awkward what I just said? Did I offend them? So I found by kind of disclosing my disability early on by leaving some breadcrumbs, after succeeding through a phone interview and being invited to come into the office, which I'm not sure that even happens much anymore now that we're in a post-COVID world and all these interviews are on Zoom or Teams and are video and virtual. But, I might ask the interviewer, thank you so much for inviting me in. Do you have a automatic door, on your building because I use a wheelchair? Or do you have accessible parking? And that would just kind of leave some breadcrumbs to that person oh, this is a little different than what I might be expecting. So that they aren't just shocked that it's a person with a disability, very significant disability in my case. That's not exactly what they're expecting on a day-to-day basis. And then, that also shows them that I'm kind of confident with who I am, my abilities, and my ability to talk about my disability, and gets rid of some worries with them. And then also in the interview, just as you might be talking, and this is way beyond, so I don't want to get too in the weeds, but answering questions about, your relative work experience, your ability to do the job, just like any other person, you talk about previous work experience, whether that be, prior careers, or if you're just coming out of school, internship experience, or projects that you did in school that might be relevant. But also a lot of people with disabilities like myself, moving, graduating from high school, going to college and living independently, I hire a lot of personal care attendants to help me get up in the morning, help me with my, activities of daily living, and help me go to bed at night. And so there's a whole skill set there of, recruiting employees, interviewing them, onboarding them, training them, scheduling them, running payroll, just dealing with all of that. And so that's an entire skill set that has a lot of professional bona fides, but also shows, wow, this guy really has his, I shouldn't say the word, but his crap together, because he is able to manage all of this. And that's an impressive skill set. That's almost like another full-time job. And he's able to successfully do school or have prior jobs. We don't really need to worry about his disability because he's clearly got it together. And it shows that I'm very comfortable talking about my disability, and they shouldn't be worried about offending me by talking about that. So I found that just kind of laying those little breadcrumbs and integrating into those answers shows the employer that you're comfortable talking about your disability and allows for kind of a candid conversation. And disclosures really played very well in my case. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, definitely. I think you bring up a lot of really great points. Michael, do you have some thoughts you want to add to when?
Yeah, just to add to that, you know, 14, 15 years ago when I was graduating college and applying for my first job, um, I got a phone call one time and, I said hello and, um, they said, may I speak with Michael Lewis? And I said, this is him. And they say, well, I'm calling from such and such about the job. And I would say, oh, wonderful. And say, a longer sentence. And immediately they could hear a kind of deflation in their voice. Um, and I had one say, well, the position is filled, but we wanted to call you and just say we were really impressed by your application. People don't do that, and so that is the one I started saying up front, I wear hearing aids, I have a speech impediment, because, eh, people would call on the phone and the first um perception or impression that they have of me is I have a speech impediment, and then whatever extrapolations they want to make from that, and so Brian makes a good point in that it has gotten a little better since COVID, because a lot of employers do not do phone calls anymore, or if they do with phone screening, they're usually gonna email you beforehand to schedule the phone screen. And that is when I take the opportunity to say again, I wear bilateral hearing aids. I have a speech impediment, but obviously from my resume it does not impact in any way my ability to perform the job. So if you need me to repeat anything, let me know. And I find that that has put people at ease, um, and kind of limit the incidence of people making erroneous assumptions or making generalizations based on something that they can't see, they can only hear.
Yeah, from listening to both of you, it sounds like kind of having a plan before being in those situations is really helpful. I heard another person say that they kind of planned out what they wanted to say or how they wanted to share their disability. Would you also say that that's helpful to kind of like have some talking points or how you want to go about it, and just kind of taking some time to prepare?
I would agree. And again, I think, so often there are concerns that disclosing your disability is going to put you at a disadvantage, against other candidates for the particular position you may be applying for. And it doesn't mean that, it's not going to be difficult necessarily to navigate a particular job with your disability, or that the accommodations process or whatever that, you may need to succeed in that are not, going to be just the easiest thing to put in place. But I find that it's really important to have in mind that your disability is really a strength when you are applying for jobs. Think of all the things that in any sort of disability that you have, whether it's muscular dystrophy, cerebral palsy, hard of hearing or deaf, or blindness, there are a lot of things that you have to do differently. And that is one of the biggest things that employers are looking for, is that diversity of thought, diversity of how things are done and how to approach different problems and come up with solutions. And I find just in my day-to-day, navigating into any building or room, I'm always thinking about, just spatially how that works, what are the exits, all those different things, the different things that come into place. And so your disability is truly a strength. So, think about, yes, the accommodations that might help you succeed in the workplace, but also think about how your disability helps make you be different and, distinguishes you from other employees.
Yeah.
And to add to that, a lot of you may have done job applications where at the end there will be that form where you have the opportunity to disclose a disability. It's a standard federal form, and the reason that they have that is because federal employment law requires any entity that does business with the federal government to hire a diverse workforce, and that includes veterans, that includes people with disabilities. And as a matter of fact, employers can get a tax credit for employing and retaining employers with disabilities. So it really does behoove you when you see that form. All it says is, yes, I have a disability, or I have a record of having had a disability, or no, I don't have a disability, or I don't wish to disclose it. My personal opinion is that by checking I don't wish to disclose this, that's kind of a giveaway, in my opinion. I think most employers are gonna look at that answer, unfortunately, and kind of, get nervous, if you will. But the other thing I wanted to touch on, Brian brought this up, your disability is a strength. And it is a value add to the workforce. And Melissa, you know that because we did the last year. MDA had a series of webinars with one of our corporate partners, Pfizer, and it was about disability is diversity. A lot of us hear all the time about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Whether that's racial diversity, or gender diversity, or, what have you. Often a entire category that missing from that DEI conversation is disability. And so lately, within the past several years, had you've had all kinds of different organizations, like inclusively, like I'm blanking on some of the other ones. Brian's organization, that their sole purpose is to help people with disabilities get placed with large companies, small companies, medium sized companies. So
Well, it looks like Michael's paused. I just want to echo all of
there's
those comments.
encompassing.
Oh, you paused for a second, Michael. You froze. So we missed a little bit of what you said.
Sorry, we need to expand the definition of DEI.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you for those comments. And I love the theme of disability is a strength, because I absolutely have seen that in just problem solving and innovation. So, Brian, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to go back to what Michael was talking about with, at the end of either applying for a job or as part of your onboarding, very often you're given a form by your employer or prospective employer. Do you have a disability, or have you had a disability? Check yes or no. And I want to make it clear, there's a concern in the disability community that by checking yes, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage because you're, again, disclosing it. As Michael said, that's part of a federal compliance issue, because any federal contractor, and federal contractors range from, companies like Boeing that do defense products to Nestle Purina to, Walmart and Microsoft, probably, Pfizer. I think he said, a lot of companies are federal contractors. And if you're a federal contractor, you have to be proving to the federal government that you are making an active effort to increase the amount of your workforce that has a disability up to at least 7% of your workforce. And when you check that form, it does not go to the HR department. It is completely separate from your hire file and everything like that. It goes to compliance, because they don't want that to impact, even have the scent of it impacting your ability to be hired there just because you disclose that you have a disability. So when I first started working, even though I have a very visible disability, you look at me outside of the camera view here, I have a very large wheelchair that I'm sitting on, so it's very clear that I have a disability. When I first started my career, I never checked yes. I just threw that paper to the side. But it really does help the employer and helps the disability community by checking yes, because employers are always working. If you're a federal contractor, it's a real benefit to have people with disabilities working for you, not just to beat that, qualification, but as Michael said, there are some certain tax benefits as well.
And not only that, Brian, but if you do check yes, that doesn't mean that if they call you in for an interview, they can bring it up. So, you don't need to be worried about, somehow that, being brought up in a way that is not on your own terms.
Yeah. So I want to keep us moving, but great information shared. There's a couple questions in the chat that kind of relate to disclosing your disability. So I want to touch on those, and then I want to move into requesting accommodations at work. So first, a great question here. If you don't think your disability will impact the job itself, do you think it's wrong not to disclose it?
I think there are two ways to go about this. And I think if you have a invisible disability, it's certainly not wrong to not disclose it. If you have a visible disability, again, it is completely up to you whether or not you disclose it, and your visible disability may not impact, your ability to perform the job, and you may not need accommodations whatsoever. And so certainly it is completely up to you whether or not to disclose. But I think, as I said, generally, for better or for worse, visible disabilities make us different than the norm. And people who aren't familiar with disabilities, it's completely unintentional, just don't have natural comfort around some of the questions that it may have. So I think, being able to be kind of comfortable and talking about your disability without making it everything that is you can certainly help in that situation, just socially in the workplace, even if you don't need accommodations. So that would be my recommendation. But again, you are not required to disclose. That is completely up to you. And if you don't need accommodations and you don't want to disclose, go for it.
What if, so just kind of thinking further down the line, what if at first you don't disclose because you don't really think you need any accommodations, but then later on down the road, something happens and you do need an accommodation, but you didn't disclose it at the beginning? Is there any repercussions to worry about?
No repercussions.
Legally speaking, no. And if they do, you go file a claim with the EEOC immediately.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
And I would just add to that, again, everybody's life changes. Your disability can change, so you can disclose at any point in time. If your condition changes and you need a little bit of something else, it's important to, talk about that. Sometimes your condition may change and an accommodation that you previously had is no longer necessary. So that's also important. So just having candid conversations and a regular check-in, I think, with your employer is important.
Yeah.
One thing we may want to highlight, though, was the ADA says reasonable accommodation. And that's where things can get tricky.
Yeah. We're going to get to accommodations next. I want to talk just a little bit more about disclosing your disability. In general, do you typically disclose it just to HR? Do you typically disclose it to your boss? Like who do you usually go to, or does it matter?
If you get hired and you need, accommodations, you're absolutely gonna want to disclose it to HR. For instance, my first job out of college was at a medical center, in the finance department, and so the HR department had an occupational therapist that came to my office on the first day and said, do you need an ergonomic keyboard? Do you need it? Some of the larger employers are quite good at being proactive about that. You definitely want to disclose it to HR. I don't see why you wouldn't disclose it to the boss. Just even as a safety measure, God forbid there was an emergency or a fire and you needed to evacuate the building and you have a physical disability. That's something that's gonna be very helpful that the people around you know that.
Yeah. What about, and there was a question that came in the chat of any recommendations for those of us with progressive disabilities where maybe you're able to do all the job tasks just fine, but your disability progresses. Should you disclose your disability at the start or just kind of say something later on as it progresses? Any thoughts there?
I'll take this one. My particular disorder is not progressive, so I don't have personal experience with this. But I would say, again, this is where disclosure and being candid, and I know that probably exhibits some privilege on my part by saying that, but being candid about it and disclosing early can play to your advantage because you get those accommodations that you need, and having a discussion with your employer about how things may change, but you're very willing to find ways to make it work. Hopefully you'll get a response from your manager or HR that they are willing to make this work for you as well. It is very expensive to recruit and hire and train somebody for a new job. And so once they have hired you, they don't want to lose you, especially if you're good at doing your job. So those accommodations that may change as your disorder progresses are probably not very expensive to make. And if you're a good employee and you do your job well, they're going to want to keep you around. It's going to be a lot cheaper for them to provide those accommodations. I think there's a study that like the average workplace accommodation, again, it's average, but it's like $13. Certainly there are workplace accommodations that are much, much more expensive. But it is, once you find a good employee, the employer wants to keep that person around. So I would just try to, again, be candid with your employer and try and find a solution that works best for you. So it is a negotiation, the accommodation process. Try and find out the thing that works best for you and best for your employer and kind of meet in the middle and figure it out. But I encourage you to have a good, candid conversation.
So that kind of moves us into the conversation around accommodations, and we've received a lot of questions in the chat. I'm going to try to get to as many of them as I can. So somebody shared that they have been on a leave of absence and they're ready to kind of go back. She's out, or this person is out on disability, expected to go back soon. Can employers refuse accommodations for return after a leave of absence? This person would like to work a lot and they're worried that now they're coming back that they won't get those accommodations. So can they be refused? You're on mute, Michael.
It really, really depends. The short answer is no, but it also depends on the extent of accommodation, to my understanding. The ADA says reasonable accommodation, but it doesn't define reasonable accommodation. Brian, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think you make a very good point that, and all the things that you said, I think if you are trying to come up with possible accommodations and helping you succeed in your job, a very good resource is what's called the Job Accommodation Network. I believe the website is askjan.org, and they have a pretty neat interface where you can kind of look up based on various different disabilities and impairments and see the different kind of accommodations that can be put in place in workplaces to work around those things. And it's a free resource where I believe you can either do a live chat or talk with kind of a guidance person from them, and it's also a free resource that can be given to your employer about providing those accommodations as well. So it's a collaborative process finding out the workplace accommodations to be successful in your job. I'm really sorry to hear having trouble and concerns about coming back from leave, because you certainly should be able to find a way to do your job and be successful and welcome back into the workplace.
Sure. Another kind of situation that I've heard too before is you get hired for one job and you're doing that job just fine. You don't need necessarily any accommodations, but then that job, the role kind of shifts, or maybe you get moved to something else that becomes maybe physically more demanding than what you were originally hired for. Is there any course of action for somebody that they can take, if their job is changed to then require things that maybe they do now need accommodations to fulfill their job? I don't know if I'm explaining that right, but I think we've all been in jobs where the work shifts and the responsibilities change, and now the need for accommodations is greater or different.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you get a promotion or you move to a different job or whatever, you still have the right to request accommodations. And so, I can do the job, but I need X, Y, and Z in order to be able to do the job or the new whatever it may be.
All right. How do you, and I guess you kind of already answered that, in that the definition of reasonable accommodation is not super clear. So if an accommodation is being denied that you feel is a reasonable accommodation, do you have any recourse?
Yeah, you can always file a complaint with your local Equal Employment Opportunity Commission office. The EEOC is a federal agency within the Department of Labor. They have branches in all the states. The biggest thing that they're gonna need to file a complaint is documentation. So if you're emailing back and forth with HR, keep a record of that. That is documentation that you can bring to the EEOC and say, my employer and I have been going back and forth about accommodations I need. Here is a record of, that conversation and what I've requested. Fact of the matter is, the law still does not define reasonable. So we've had court cases where the employer have been able to successfully demonstrate that, the accommodations were beyond reasonable. But there's no statutory definition of reasonable. so it's kind of up to interpretation.
Thank you. Brian, this question's for you. How long does an employer have to respond to an accommodation request?
It's going to be another one of those fun ones to answer. The ADA does not lay out a specific time frame, but they should be responding to that accommodation request as quickly as possible.
Any other feedback on that question, Michael?
Yeah,
No.
there shouldn't be a 3 or 6 month lag between the request and the answer. They should be pretty proactive about, letting you know one way or the other, what the status is.
Yeah. Another question that came in the chat is working from home. If you're working from home, are you eligible for accommodations?
Yeah, I mean, employment is employment. And if you're working it from home, absolutely, you can get accommodations for that. Working from home itself, it can often be an accommodation, and one that a lot of employers are willing to provide and realize is not a costly thing to provide for their employees as an accommodation post-pandemic, since we all had to work remotely for, a year, 2, 3, sometimes people still are. And so, yeah, just because you're working from home does not mean you can't get accommodations.
All right. I know we're coming up on about 5 more minutes, and I do want to get to.
I did see one question in the chat that said, could an employer choose not to hire you because they're afraid that the disability is gonna drive up insurance rates for the whole company? When the company provides insurance, they get a group rate. When the whole purpose of the group rate is that the insurance provider has a risk pool to spread the risk. That should not be happening. If it is a medium or large size employer, I'm not aware that that has ever been an issue that would factor into a decision like that.
I'll just echo that in that, at Starkloff Disability Institute, where I work, as CFO, I'm in charge of helping acquire and implement our health insurance plan. We only have 12 employees. 80% of our employees have a disability, many of them very significant. And as Michael said, health insurance benefits are generally put into a wide risk pool. And even as a small company, we're part of a larger pool. And so our health insurance rates aren't any higher just because the majority of our employees have a form of disability.
And I would add that under the Affordable Care Act, it's illegal to charge higher rates on the basis of a disability.
Yeah, that's a great point. I hadn't thought about that. Really good question. There actually are so many other really good questions that have come in both through registration and the chat. So I'm trying to figure out which ones we can cover in 3 minutes. Are there any I know reasonable accommodation again is not defined in the ADA, but are there like common criteria that employers tend to use, or is it really just whatever they interpret?
It's pretty much whatever they want to interpret reasonable to mean.
Okay.
I would just add to that, in asking for your accommodation or whatever, that provide the employer with like as much information about what it is you need or what you believe will help you succeed. If you can show them, what is needed very easily and how easy it would be to implement and everything, much more likely to get that. Don't make it abstract. Don't kind of leave it up to them to figure out. People love problem solvers. And again, as a person with a disability, you know what you need best to succeed. So, do your part, and hopefully that'll make it easier on all parties.
That's a great point, Brian.
Yeah, that is a really great point. And along with that, there was a question that came in about getting documentation from like a doctor to support work accommodations. Do you find that that's necessary, that employers are looking for medical documentation?
Under the ADA, the employer is allowed to request that.
Okay.
Yeah, they're allowed to ask for confirmation from your doctor that you need the accommodation you're requesting.
Yeah, they
Ask,
do
what is your
have a
disability?
right. Sorry, they do not have a right to ask for a letter, going into diagnosis or, any sort of that private data that's covered by HIPAA, but they are entitled to request a letter from your doctor affirming that yes, you need this accommodation.
Okay. We are at the top of the hour. I want to end with one question, and that is, what resources or supports have you found to be helpful that are out there that maybe you'd like to share with the audience? Websites, programs, anything?
I will again tout that website, the Job and Accommodation Network, Ask Jan. I think it was posted in the chat. I find that that's a very helpful, free for you and free for the employer resource. I wouldn't be a responsible employee if I wasn't doubting the services of Starkloff Disability Institute itself. We do all kinds of kind of courses and community groups and webinars for people who are currently seeking careers, transitioning into adulthood and into a profession in college, and also those in high school. And all of our programs, especially for those in college and adulthood, are free, supported by charitable donations. And they're available virtually nationwide. So reach out to us, Starkloff Disability Institute. We're happy to help.
And I would also encourage people to reach out to the state vocational rehab agencies. The purpose is to help people with disabilities or that have had occupational injuries re-enter the workforce. There's no charge for the services. You can always call and ask a question. And also, every state has what they call a P&A. What that stands for is a protection and advocacy agency. And it is usually called, Disability Rights Virginia or Disability Rights Iceland or Disability by California. There's every state is required to have one by the IDD Act. The nonprofit legal agency that you can call and you can ask them, you know, hey, I'm applying for a job, or hey, I'm in the interview process for the job and I have questions about how to go about requesting accommodations. They can give you a lot of advice, legally speaking. If you have evidence of discrimination or violation of ADA, the protection and advocacy can also give you advice on how to proceed with a EEOC complaint. So those are two resources that I would highly recommend people use them.
Oh, excellent. Great resources there. I also will just put a plug in for an access workshop that MDA developed just late last year all around employment, and it lists several of the sites that Brian and Michael have shared are in this workshop. So definitely, I just put it in the chat there. I also put the the resources that Brian and Michael shared in the chat. Thank you both. I think this was a great conversation. I feel like we could have probably talked for another hour or two about it, and we are just so thankful that you were able to join us tonight. Just to kind of close us out, I do want to give another shout out to our webinar supporter, Edgewise Therapeutics. We're thankful for their generous support to help us continue community education programs like this. I also want to just say that if you're new to MDA, if you've been diagnosed with a neuromuscular disease, or if you have a loved one who has been, we encourage you to stay engaged with MDA. You can do this by visiting us at mda.org/join. You can scan the QR code on the screen there, but it's free to join. It'll keep you up to date on the latest information. It'll sign you up for our Quest magazine, which is an excellent resource, has a lot of great articles about employment and other daily living kind of articles. Also gives you an opportunity to connect with others in the community and to hear about these educational opportunities as well. So with that, we would love to hear your comments about this webinar. When you leave, a web page will automatically pop up with a short survey about today's webinar, and completing this will just help us have some insight as we plan our future educational programs. If anyone has questions after this webinar, please feel free to email them to us at the resource center at mdausa.org. We'll follow up with you. Again, I want to thank Brian and Michael for their time today and for sharing their expertise with us. This concludes today's webinar, and we hope to see you again real soon.